What would you do if your school went into lockdown? You heard gunshots. These students lived through that nightmare, and their scary true stories will stay with you long after the video ends. First, like the video, subscribe, and comment your worst school horror story below. Let's begin. Lockdown at my elementary school. School lockdown drills are now as common as fire drills. I'm sure every school or county has their own style or individual protocol, but essentially, it's the same across the board. Everyone is to get into a classroom, lock the door, turn off the lights, group into a part of the room out of view from the windows and doors, and stay completely silent. The goal is to disappear from whatever hypothetical active shooter is roaming the hallways. Without these drills, well, the same thing would happen as when school shooters first started popping up. Chaos, people fleeing in all directions, creating a frenzy of targets to choose from, and more people would die. More children would die. I was a counselor for an elementary school. My last position was my second, the first being in a hellhole for 2 years. That first elementary school was a mess, mostly because of the principal. He was old and tired, walking the halls with frazzled white hair and wrinkled button-up shirts with no tie. It seemed he was over it all, counting down the days until his retirement. He showed little interest in my role, practically rolling his eyes at whatever issue brought a child to my door. He clearly had the whole "this generation is soft" mentality. Kids aren't depressed or anxious, they're just whining. He handed out reprimands and punishments without any real investigations and treated the staff poorly, and he slacked on drills. I remembered being horrified on my first fire drill there, standing out in the playground in the near-freezing autumn breeze, surrounded by cold and confused students as scattered, disorganized as staff tried to somehow get accountability. The staff and I tried to schedule more drills, tried to get him in on planning, but he could care less. Eventually he was relieved when teachers had enough and went to the board, but by then I lost motivation and needed a change. Where I ended up next was refreshing. The principal, a tall and slim middle-aged man with a square jaw and kind eyes, always wearing some version of a cartoon-themed tie, and the staff here take their jobs rather seriously, almost to the point of me feeling too intimidated to share ideas during meetings when I first arrived. Fortunately, I loosened up over time, and when everyone saw how much I cared for the children, I was accepted. I loved it there. I quit 2 months later. The reason I quit is something I haven't gotten over. I still dream about it. I still hear the sounds that didn't make sense as they were happening, but came together afterward to a horrific realization. I had been making my rounds that day, checking on my more needy students during their classes, making sure no one was on the verge of a meltdown or anything. I remember feeling relieved to be walking around because I had been sitting in the nurse's office with a first grader who ran and slipped on the slick floor the custodian was in the middle of mopping. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with the child, but I advised the custodian to put up a caution wet floor sign before we had a lawsuit on our hands. I was feeling good until lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. It was one of the office administrators over the loudspeaker. At first, I was just surprised. Then I felt my heart jump and my fingertips turn icy as I realized the reason I was surprised. There was no drill scheduled that day, which meant this was not a drill. When the announcement blared, I had just opened the door to peek into a kindergarten classroom. When the overhead speaker clicked, indicating the end of the announcement, my eyes met with the teacher's, Mrs. Jameson. We froze, staring at one another for a good 3 seconds, her standing with a pointer in one hand, with her class all neatly seated on the carpet area. The students were silent, some looking at her and some at me. Then she and I came to some kind of unspoken agreement. Training kicked in. We both sighed casually and smiled down at the kids. Mrs. Jameson said, "Well, kids, looks like we got a lockdown drill. Let's show Miss Vasquez how well we can do." "Sounds good to me," I said as I closed the door and pulled down the curtain to the door's tiny window. "I'd love to see how this class does during a lockdown drill. I might have some rewards if you do well." Then I remembered something. I said to the teacher, "Janet, I'll be right back," before running out the room. I had remembered the fourth graders were around the corner from where I was, outside their classrooms and scattered all around the hallway, putting up holiday decorations. I was afraid of the chaos that might ensue. Kids pushing and shoving to get back to their own classrooms instead of just ducking into the nearest one, as was protocol. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Everyone was calm and well versed on what to do. I herded some lingering and confused kids into rooms and was about to run back to the kindergarten room when I spotted something out the corner of my eye. When I turned around, I couldn't help but mutter, "Seriously?" At the end of the hallway, sitting just outside the edge of sunlight that casted onto the windows of the double-door exit nearby, was a third grader. He was curled up, knees to chest, hood pulled over, but I knew who it was. Charlie, probably doodling in his damn sketchbook, listening to music, even though electronic devices were banned. The school had warned him dozens of times, but he always manages to sneak his phone in. Honestly, I've spotted him a few times with the buds in his ears, but let it go. Music and drawing were his thing, and he had it rough at home. I ran over, pulled his hood back, and yanked the earbuds out his ears. "Lock down, sweetie. Come on." I was tempted to sound more urgent, but I wanted to remain casual and not alarm him. Charlie, like all students in that school, took lockdown drills seriously. His eyes widened and he jumped up. We ran over to the nearest room, the computer lab, and I used my key to let him in. Then I hesitated. The right thing to do would be to go in with him. But I thought about Mrs. Janet Jameson. She was young, her second year teaching, and her IA was out sick. I felt I had to help her manage those kids. There was no telling how long this lockdown would last, and she needed the help. I closed the door, turned. I realized I was probably the last one still in the hallway. It was eerie, not having another soul in the hallway. It felt abandoned. No, hollow was the right word. It felt like a hollow, like a cave. I heard footsteps, rhythmic thuds on the linoleum floor. Boots? No, they were softer than that, although too heavy to be sneakers. Or maybe the person making them were big. It was not too far off. I guess I should explain the layout. The school is only one story. From a bird's eye view, the hallways carve out what looks like two cubes close stacked on top of each other, the top being where the entrance was. Those two cubes were fused together by the same middle hallway. I was at the far bottom of the bottom cube, close to the left corner. The footsteps sounded as if coming down the left side of the top cube, so that if I were to turn down that left corner, I'd end up far away, yet face to face with whoever was there. The main problem was that Janet Jameson's room was down that left side hallway. I took off my flats and tiptoed to the left corner. I was tempted to look, to just peek, but at the same time was too scared the person would see me. The steps stopped and I heard a hard rattling. He was trying a door. When it didn't open, I heard him whisper something, probably cursing to himself, before continuing to walk, and it was a hymn, judging from that whisper. The voice was too deep to be a woman. I don't know why I waited there, listening to the footsteps coming my way. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly because I could have just went into the nearest room. Yet I had an anxious, one-track mind of getting to Mrs. Jameson's room. The man tried another locked door, another hoarse whisper. I thought I could just sprint to the room, unlock the door, and rush in. No, he'd see me, and that would only draw attention to Mrs. Jameson's room, thus endangering the children. Plus, what if I couldn't get the key in and unlock the door in time before he ran up to me? I took a backward step, preparing to turn and sprint to the right corner if he got too close, when I heard says shift in the echoing steps. I listened and realized he turned down the middle hallway. I drew in a deep breath and exhaled shakily as I braved to peek around the corner. I was right. I saw no one and yet heard another door being tried, so he had to be down that middle hallway. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Jameson's door opened without a sound. I saw her face appear within the darkness of the room. Our eyes met, and she beckoned me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to wait any longer and risk freezing up. I ran and made it in. As soon as I did, Janet carefully closed the door. I saw all the kids clustered in the darkest corner of the room, sitting and staring expectantly at me. "What are you doing?" I whispered harshly to the kindergarten teacher. "You were not supposed to open the door during a lockdown." "Well, you're welcome," she sighed. "I just had a bad feeling because you said you'd be back. Plus, after I heard the last door closed, I heard a couple of your steps. I assumed they were yours because they clicked like shoes and just knew you were still out there." My shoulders slumped. I could no longer hide my relief or gratefulness. "Thank you, Janet." I saw her teeth show in the dark as she smiled. "No problem. Just help me keep the kids calm. We heard a noise outside. It wasn't close, but it was strange, like a heavy thud." "What's that?" asked one of the kids. We shushed him and listened. Silence. Nothing happened for the next 20 or so minutes. Janet and I handed out coloring books and crayons for the kids to color. We made sure everyone for every color. It sounds petty, but the last thing we needed was kids asking to borrow colors and start bickering over it. One of the little girls didn't color. She just stared at us with worrying and waiting eyes. She knew this wasn't a drill. I sat down in one of the small chairs and I signaled her to come to me. She immediately ran over, sat in my lap, and buried her head into my shoulder. I put my arms around her and whispered reassuring words. The rest of the class noticed this, and unfortunately, it seemed to make them anxious. Just then, we heard footsteps. We all stiffened. The steps were coming our way. Janet and I met eyes. She was completely pale. The footsteps seemed heavier and less rhythmic. At one point, there was some shuffling and some rubbing or dragging of clothes. The man must have stumbled and slid against the wall. Was he hurt? Then the steps resumed, getting closer still. My eyes shot toward the door. The girl and I gripped each other hard with rigid bodies. We felt almost fused as one statue. There was ringing in my ears, and my eyes burned as I stared unblinkingly at the doorknob. Then bang. It was as if someone threw their weight into the door. The kids screamed. Janet screamed. I almost did, but instead put the girl down and ran over to Janet and shook her by the shoulders. She stopped screaming, and I pointed to the horrified children. At that moment, intense weight seemed to come upon us. I felt everything fade away for a moment. The screaming, the darkness of the room, the single heavy knock against the door that followed after the bang. And within our gaze, we came to a mutual declaration. The kids, we both thought it. We had to keep them safe. That was all that mattered. "The bookshelf," she blurted. I understood and nodded. In response, I said, "Use the blanket, okay?" She nodded, also understanding. Then we separated. I ran to the bookshelf and began pushing. It was used to hold other supplies, like containers of extra glue sticks and yarn, not books, so it was not as heavy as it could have been, but it was heavy. "Shannon?" I got it. The shelf slid across the room, getting easier as I built momentum. The kids were still screaming, but it started to quiet down. I glanced over and saw Janet had already draped the ends of a large green blanket over the coat cubby and another bookshelf so it hung over everyone like a makeshift tent. Good. It would give the kids a sense of feeling hidden. She heard Janet trying to talk them down. By now, the man was trying the doorknob, and I heard a low grunt. I kept pushing, and finally, with gritted teeth and every muscle in my body hard as rock, I made it. I turned the shelf the long way and rested it against the door. I turned my back to the shelf and leaned against it. "Where's Miss Vasquez?" a child cried out. Then the other kids followed and began anxiously calling out to me. "I'm here, guys." I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. "You guys are the fort, and I'm the lookout." Janet said, "Yes, she's the lookout. She'll tell us if we are clear or in danger. Miss Vasquez, are we clear?" "Oh yes, the danger was here, but it passed. We're all clear. Kids." As I said this, I prayed there wasn't another thrash against the door. There wasn't. It all stopped. The doorknob stopped jiggling. Silence. After a few minutes, I slid down to sit on the floor, still leaning against the bookshelf. As the silence settled in, and I called out 5 all clears to the kids to offer consistent reassurance, my body began to slow settle. The moment that crash against the door happened, I felt amped up, light on my feet, strong. In fact, I remembered when one of these bookshelves were being moved from one classroom to another. It took 2 custodians, grown men, to slide it along with a struggle. I had managed it alone. It was all adrenaline. And now, with the kids calm enough to be singing softly, along with Janet under the blanket, I was crashing. To top off my sense of ease, I saw flashing red and blue lights coming in through the window. It was over, and I felt sick. I even smelled copper in the air. I rubbed my nose to check for a nosebleed, but strangely saw nothing. I looked at lights dancing across the ceiling. "Yay, guys," I called in the fakest peppy voice. "The policemen are here." They had seen the lights and were already cheering. I tried to say something else. I can't remember what, but it was probably to remind them they still had to remain quiet. Rather than words, I let out a gut-tightening heave. Not much came out, just enough for me to spit. I felt something. Since I was no longer sweating and my skin felt cold and clammy, I became aware of some warmth beneath me, like I was sitting in a puddle. I frowned. I soiled myself, I thought. Great. I shifted to examine my jeans to see if it was urine or feces. I saw darkness on the beige tile. I hesitantly touched it. It was too thick to be urine, and I didn't smell anything. Or rather, I didn't smell any bodily waste. That coppery scent from earlier was stronger now. As I leaned away from the bookshelf, I saw the liquid hadn't come from me, but from beneath the bookshelf. No, not the bookshelf. It came from under the door. A stone dropped in my chest as I realized what the liquid was. It was blood. Blood had been oozing into the room. What the hell? Noise came from the hallway. The calm rumble of footsteps, deep voices in casual conversation, and chaotic static from walkie-talkies. The police, and it didn't sound like they were in a rush. We all heard them coming closer. Then they stopped walking. They stopped talking. We could only hear the only thing heard were the walkies. Why were they just standing there? Then someone among them broke the silence with a "holy shit" before a storm of urgent footsteps came and stopped right outside Janet Jameson's door. Eventually, the all clear was given to every class except ours. Janet and I didn't protest or ask any questions. We were too confused, too overwhelmed and worn out. We were at a point of absolute submission because we thought obedience would make things go faster and we can just all go home. I asked Janet for the blanket to cover myself and the pool under me before she turned the lights on and allowed the kids to stretch out. I whispered to her about the blood, and she only threw her head back and closed her eyes as if to say, "What else?" After an hour, the window gates were unlocked. Janet, the kids, and I exited the class through the windows so we didn't have to open the door and see whatever was happening. I looked stupidly at one of the officers after climbing out the window and said, "I have blood on me. It's not mine." I just said it. I felt I had to before they noticed it themselves. The officer just nodded grimly, with no sign of surprise. Then he escorted Janet and I to sit at the open end of an ambulance to be examined. When the medics gave the thumbs up, 2 officers came over. At first, they just stood there, heads up, but eyes staring at the ground. Then they removed their hats and told us there was a dead body in front of Janet Jameson's classroom door. What do you say to something like that? They paused, as if giving us room to react or respond. Janet and I just looked at one another. They looked at us. What did they want us to say? As it turns out, they weren't waiting for a reaction. They were giving moment to let that news sink in before they hit us with another. This time, we reacted. This time, we jumped up, asking what they meant, asking why and how. We freaked. We acted like they told us the sky just fell. The dead body was the principal. The officers tried to calm us. When we were finally able to sit and listen, one of them offered to explain everything. Then they looked at one another, agreeing on something, before looking directly at me. "We could show you what happened." I tensed up. The other officer quickly added, "From the cameras, he means. You don't have to see him. Watch the recordings." It seemed the invitation was exclusively for me, and Janet didn't say anything. At the time, I didn't understand, but looking back, I think everyone felt I had a right to see. I think they felt that I deserved a clear story because I'm the one with someone else's blood all over my pants. I was taken inside the building, into the main office. A man with a polo and jeans was seated at one of the administrator's desk, computer ready, waiting for me. With a nod from the officers that escorted me in, the man in the polo hit play. There were 9 camera shots playing at once on the screen, 3 each row, all black and white. They all played pretty much the same thing at that moment. The beginning of the lockdown, just kids through the halls, into classrooms. Each camera just showed incoherent blurs and shifting shades of gray. In less than a minute, the blurs disappeared and the hallway was bare. My attention was then drawn to 2 screens. One showed me taking my shoes off and tiptoeing. The other showed the principal walking down the left side hallway. The principal stopped at a door, grabbed the door handle. The officer next to me said, the school was transitioning into having new doors, correct? New locks? We were. Our doors were old and were being upgraded, which meant new locks, which meant new keys. At that point, less than half the rooms in the building had new doors, and not everyone had a key. He was checking the doors, making sure someone didn't end up in a room they didn't have a key to. Of course, I hadn't known that. With a stiff body and wide eyes, I watched my past self on the screen, cowering, truly believing I was in danger. The principal made the turn, and a moment later, I was dashing to Janet's room. I was gone. Now there was only the principal. After checking a door, he seemed satisfied, like he all was finished. He leaned into the door and seemed to speak before stepping back. The hoarse whispering. It wasn't cursing. It was him tell the people inside it was only him, and not to be afraid. I saw the caution wet floor sign was 3 feet away. I noticed it because something in my gut knew what was going to happen next. The principal slipped. He did a brief little shuffle, almost comedically, before his legs came out from under him. His head bounced off the floor. There was no audio, but I could hear the hollow thump. I could hear it then in my head, because I had heard it in real time. That heavy thud. The one from when we shushed the boy from asking what that noise was. Jesus, that was his head, I said aloud. No one answered. The principal slowly stood, leaving a dark splatter behind on the floor. His legs were shaky legs. He looked left and right, seemingly confused. He held one hand to his head and began to walk back the way he came. He stumbled. His knees shook. By now, darkness was dripping on the floor. Then he slowly sank to the ground, as if he was suddenly sleepy and needed a nap. Then he just lay there. The man in the polo moved the computer mouse to slide the time bar to 22 minutes later. As if fast-forwarded, a dark mass appeared and grew into a perfect circle around the principal's head. The video resumed with the principal stirring. He stood and stepped back, seemingly horrified by the pool of darkness. He stepped around the puddle and walked. I squinted and saw he had dropped something. He rounded the corner, making his way to the closest room for help. Janet's room. He wavered on rubbery legs. At one point, he leaned against the wall as he walked a few steps, sliding along with his shoulder before pushing off and trying to balance again. He finally made it to Janet's door and fell against it. We had screamed. He raised a fist and gave one strong pound before trying the knob. He patted his pockets, looked around, slumped his head, and tried the knob again. The thing he had dropped. His keys. I felt hot tears run down my cheeks as I watched him sink down to sit with his back against the door. His head drooped, and that was it. The man in the polo stopped the video but kept looking at the screen. I shook my head, feeling confused, even though there was nothing to be confused about. I thought about where I had been at that point in the video. I had been sitting with my back against the bookcase, which means he and I had been sitting back to back, just feet apart, while he slowly bled out and died. And I had sat his blood, the blood that dripped from his cracked head. The children sang softly as the darkness pooled and soaked into my pants. And it was me. I had kept him out. No, I didn't know. I felt cold and afraid. I stepped back away from the officers. I didn't mean to kill him. The officer's face dropped. What? No, ma'am, no. We aren't blaming you. We just felt you should know. because I did it, right? I was losing sense of reality. I couldn't feel my legs and felt like I was somehow floating and sinking at the same time. I'm going to jail. I should, because I fucking kept him out. Ma'am. I shoved a goddamn bookcase against the door. The officer was shaking his head, reaching out to me. I passed out. I quit being a counselor. Actually, I just stopped showing up. It was Janet who was kind enough to speak to the school county administration. She managed to turn my unannounced permanent absence into an official resignation. No one argued. No one asked me to sign or do anything. No one bothered me because they all knew. They all knew I let him die. Janet said they all feel sorry for us, her and I, that they all sympathized with our situation. But I know that's bullshit. I ripped up every get well card and popped every we miss you balloon that got delivered. They're all pretending, acting as if I hadn't let Daniel Seymour Hutchins, a married man with 2 children at home, 253 others at work, slip away in an empty hallway, alone. I don't call him by name. I prefer to remember him as the principal. It creates some distance, like we were only co-workers, strictly professional. Not at all like he was the shoulder I cried on when I broke up with my boyfriend, or the man who went over the spending limit for me when we did the blind gift exchange for Christmas. To top it off, we were never really in any danger. The lockdown was initiated because the police were called by a witness who claimed to see a man with a gun wandering the streets just a few blocks away, drunkenly harassing people. When the police arrived, the man was in fact very drunk and did have a gun. A brief standoff between he and the police went on for half an hour before the drunk gave up. And guess what? When the police examined the weapon, it turned out to be fake. It turned out to be a fucking paintball pistol. But that doesn't upset nearly as much as the thought that still haunts me. I could have just fucking looked. That's all I can think. There were 2 instances where I could have just looked and saved everything. The first time, I could have just poked my head around that corner and saw the principal walking my way. Then I would have put my shoes back on, step out, and give him a wave, and he would have approached me and passed right by that yellow caution wet floor sign. The other time I could have looked was when I gave the second all clear to Janet and the kids. I can deny it all I want. I can it on retrospect. I had known at that moment something wasn't right, because I realized we hadn't heard any footsteps walking away from the door. So why the silence, I had thought briefly, if they were still there. At that moment, I thought about standing up, reaching across the bookshelf, and pushing the door window's curtain aside to peek out into the hallway. If I had, I would have saw the blood trail leading to the door. Then I would have looked down to see the principal slumped over. I would have shoved the shelf aside, opened the door, and used that stupid green 10 blanket to apply pressure and stop the bleeding. I would have done all that, but I didn't. I didn't because protocol said stay away from the windows and doors. And plus, I was just plain scared. I ignored my gut and hid behind procedure. I was a coward. When I lay awake at night, I always hear a thump. What follows are the sounds of the principal walking and stumbling through my apartment. I can hear his feet on the linoleum, even though I have carpet. I hear his shoulder brushing against the wall. Then I hear the heavy crash and knock on my closed bedroom door. I can almost see the knob jiggling. At that point, I always get up, frantically pull the bedroom door open. I do it every time, and every single night without fail, I collapse into tears when I see no one is there. Our school went into lockdown in 6th grade, and nothing about it makes any sense. This story is old, almost 15 years old at this point. To this day, it remains probably the single most unexplained event in my entire life. Those who witnessed it seldom, if ever, speak about it. All these years later, and I'm still not sure what to make of it, so I figured posting it here may lead to some answers. I was in 6th grade at the time, but my memory of the day is as vivid now as it was then, much to my dismay. I've suffered from nightmares on and off ever since, and the true extent on my mental well-being may never be truly known. It started like any other day with me grumpily walking to catch the school bus and nearly missing it as per norm. It was mid-September at the time, with temperate winds and comforting warmth renown of early autumn. The place I grew up in was a small Midwestern town in the central United States. The whole school had only maybe 200 kids in it in grades 1 through 8, and my bus only brought around 30 of us. My friends Scotty and Lamar hopped on at the second stop, and the three of us discussed Yu-Gi-Oh cards most of the way to school. Maybe most of this is irrelevant, but I think it's important to emphasize how boring and routinely this whole day began. It made what happened later that much stranger. It wasn't until lunch that something finally happened. I'd met up with Scotty, Lamar, and a few of our other friends. After eating, we formed a group and went out onto the grass field to play our variation of football. The style we played was known as smear the deer, with deer actually being a different rhyming word that may get me canceled for saying nowadays. For those that don't know, it was basically American football, but with more youthful angst. Somebody would just punt the ball, and whoever got it would run aimlessly while praying to the good Lord above as everyone else tried to obliterate them. As you can imagine, it spawned a lot of fights and got many of us suspended over the years. Yet we kept playing because we were dumb school children. So one of the kids punts it, and this kid named Robert catches it. He made it like 3 steps before getting clobbered by like 5 kids to the laughter and winces of everyone else. Things went on that way for a bit, and at some point, Kyle got the ball. Kyle was like the best punter in terms of distance, but knowing which direction it would go was anyone's guess. So Kyle boots it, and we watch as it soars far to the left and off into the woods. Our schoolhouse was in the middle of this big field, and the improvised football field was right next to the woods that surrounded it, all about 200 yards out. "Good job, Kyle, you dumbass," another kid, Preston, jeered. Kyle just laughed and flipped him off as he jogged towards the tree line to retrieve it. He reached it a moment later and slowly began searching the woods while the rest of us waited. I watched as he looked around in there, and suddenly he just froze up. His whole body just went stiff as a board, and he just stood there, staring for like 10 seconds before someone finally yelled at him to hurry up. Kyle didn't budge, nor react to the insult in any way. Another few seconds passed before he slowly turned back to face us. That's when I noticed the slack-mouthed, wide-eyed expression on his face. "Damn, Kyle, you shit your pants or something?" Another kid, Carlos said with a laugh. But Kyle's expression didn't falter. He then quickly glanced back at the woods. A split second later, and he fell onto his back, scrambling backwards and muttering frantically, "Nah, fuck that, man. Fuck that." He was met with a chorus of laughter from the others. Without pausing at all, Kyle just walked quickly back towards the school without another word. The others made jokes and laughed, but his reaction really unsettled me. The horror on his face appeared genuine, and I'd never seen him look like that. Kyle was the type to never seem afraid of anything, and seeing him react like he did was downright worrying. Scotty and I then silently approached the spot that Kyle had gone to, both of us now a bit hesitant. The rest of the group had now gone mostly silent, with only muttered conversation in hushed tones behind us. Once we reached the grove, we slowly peered within. I spotted the football almost right away, only about 30 feet within, but no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I'd been in that patch of woods 100 times before, and nothing looked any different. Nothing obvious that would have spooked Kyle like that, but still, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. It was a really odd feeling, but I just shrugged it off. Ignoring them, I sauntered inside to grab the ball. As soon as my hand touched it, something changed. I've still not found the best way to describe this, but the closest thing is like when a plane depressurizes. My ears popped, and my equilibrium seemed knocked off kilter for a split second. It was the weirdest feeling, and it struck me completely out of nowhere. After pausing for a moment to confirm I wasn't about to pass out or something, I grabbed the ball and stood back up. As soon as I did, I felt something on the back of my neck. Hot air coming in rhythmic and rancid waves, like someone was literally breathing down my neck. I spun back around, heart suddenly racing in my chest. There was nothing behind me, aside from Scotty standing and staring, unsettled back at me. "You good, dude?" he asked. Truth be told, I didn't know whether I was or not, or how to account for what had just happened, but I nodded back anyways. Part of me wondered whether it was just anxiety or something, but I didn't really know what to think. As a young boy in middle school, though, admitting to fear was social suicide and not something I was about to do. You didn't see anything behind me, did you? Scotty gave me a curious glance. No. Why? It was clear to me he wasn't laying, and he was standing much too far away for it to have been him messing with me somehow. Furthermore, I heard no footsteps behind me, and if it had been him, then the piles of leaves on the ground would have been a dead giveaway. With an uncertain shiver, I shrugged it off as best I could, and the two of us returned to the others with the ball. I didn't play much after that, as my mind was suddenly convinced that something was very wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint it. It felt like someone was watching us, hidden well within the trees. Eventually, I decided to go try and find Kyle, but the bell rang before I could. Math was my next class, and I spent most of it trying to forget that unnerved feeling and calm myself down. Things went as normal, but after about 20 minutes, I felt myself needing to pee. The teacher excused me to go to the restroom, and I grabbed the hall pass from her desk as I exited the classroom. As I made my way down the hall, I noticed that outside had gotten suddenly dark. Not dark enough for night, but dark like a thick overcast of clouds. Since the sun had been shining brightly during lunch, I found that kind of odd too, but didn't think much more of it. As mentioned earlier, our school was small in terms of students and faculty, so of course the building itself was no exception. It was only about 75,000 square feet, or about 20,000 smaller than the average Walmart. It was just outside our hometown, and about half a mile away from the local police station. The lights flickered when I was in the bathroom, washing my hands. Again, not something super unusual, as the school was old and prone to the occasional electrical mishap. They stabilized a moment later, and I made my way out back into the hallway. As soon as I exited the bathroom, I froze. The outside window had gotten much darker than before, like it was suddenly the middle of the night. My initial thought was cool, a solar eclipse, but as someone emerged from the office, that thought evaporated. A familiar middle-aged man hustled into the hallway, scrambling to the front doors and quickly locking them. It was our school principal, and as he turned to face me standing in the hall behind him, I saw an unrivaled terror etched upon his face. "Get back to your class now. Tell your teacher code silver." My heart sunk as I heard the words, and I realized the deadly seriousness in his voice. Without a word, I sprinted back to the classroom, flinging the door open and scrambling inside as I got one last look behind me. The entire environment seemed to have flipped in an instant, and something was very wrong. My teacher, Mrs. Smith, scolded me in an annoyed tone as I re-entered. I turned back from the door and stared at her. Her expression seemed to slowly turn from cross to visibly concerned. "Code silver," I muttered out. Mrs. Smith's eyes went wide. "Lock the door. Everyone into the corner. Now," she commanded. The students did as requested, quickly filing into the corner and out of sight from the door. I locked the door, and Mrs. Smith rushed towards me to ensure it was secure. After which, she rushed back to her desk, dialed a few numbers in her desk phone, and spoke. Her voice blared over the intercom, reiterating the lockdown order for all others in the school. Everyone packed together tightly into the corners, out of sight of the door. The entire class then hunkered down as we had practiced many times before. Once there, Mrs. Smith doused the lights, and everything fell eerily silent. The next few moments, we heard the faint sounds of the next door classrooms, likely doing the same as all of us held our breath. Most American kids probably know that Code Silver is the national alert given for an active shooter. Anyone who attended a school in the States probably remembers practicing the lockdown drills at one point or another. Basically, the whole class just locks the doors and hides together in the corner. The only defense is the locked door and hope that whatever danger is outside will not be able to get in. "What did you see out there, Eric?" one of the girls in the class whispered to me. Mrs. Smith shushed the both of us before I could reply. I pondered the same question in silence as we all waited. The sounds of the other classrooms soon hushed as well. The entire vicinity fell eerily quiet as all of us waited like fish trapped in a barrel. The more I thought about the way the principal reacted, the less sense it made. I hadn't seen anything to indicate an active shooter and just assumed that he had, and yet still, I had no explanation for how things had suddenly gone so dark. It wasn't like a school shooter could affect the weather, and the windows were far too large for someone to have covered them so quickly. Something very different was happening. The hallway lights extinguished a few minutes later, leaving us alone in silence and sudden complete darkness. Even the windows in the classroom didn't show any light from beyond, and the darkness became so thick I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. We stayed like that for several minutes before a sudden calamity struck. It sounded like the shattering of glass and creaking of metal. My heart was throbbing in my chest then, and the muffled sounds of crying and whimpering from the other students surrounded me. Mrs. Smith shushed us all, trying her best to maintain order. By that point, my eyes had adjusted a bit to the darkness, and I could see Mrs. Smith looking through the door's side windows. Silence befell once more, a lingering malaise which lasted several minutes. Suddenly, Mrs. Smith audibly gasped and backed away from the window. I saw her hold her index up to her lips and could see tears sparkle in her eyes. Suddenly, the room began to grow brighter. I thought the power was coming back on when I realized the light was actually coming from something out in the hallway. It was a bright effervescence with a very slight reddish tint that softly shimmered. The light seemed to flicker ever so slightly, like that of a flashlight losing power, but different somehow. In the years since I've tried to replicate that light using various other light sources, but I've never quite gotten it right. It wasn't a flashlight or open flame producing the light. That much I'm certain of, and I can't say for certain what it was. A sound emerged along with it, sounding like wet, squishy footsteps, as though someone were trudging through a swamp. They came closer, and the light grew brighter. In a few seconds, it seemed to be directly outside the classroom door, and I could literally feel the other students hold their breaths. A slight thud hit the door, and none of us dared make a sound. The door handle jiggled slightly, but from our vantage point, none of us could see who or what was on the other side. The lights seemed to flicker and change intensity outside, beaming through the windows in altered variations. We were hunkered down perpendicular to the door, meaning the light couldn't reach us so long as it stayed outside. We could only hide there and offer silent prayers that whatever was making the light wouldn't get in. By some miracle it didn't, and several seconds later, the jiggling handle stopped. The footsteps then grew distant and the light faded. The relief was palpable, but it did not last. Perhaps a minute later, and a sudden, shrill, ear-piercing scream rang out down the hall, one that seemed cut short at its apex. The sounds of slight skirmish ensued with crashing and thumping. It was over in just a few seconds, and the uncomfortable silence returned. It went on that way for hours, with me and the other students hiding in the darkness. We heard more screams and other noises at certain points, but whatever was out there never returned to our door. At some point, the darkness outside finally relented, and it seemed as though the sun was beginning to rise. I know that wasn't the case because my wristwatch told me it was just before 5 p.m., seeming to affirm that discovery was the fact that the sun was still high in the sky and not anywhere near the horizon. A few minutes later, and the sounds of police sirens emerged. Dozens of police and even a SWAT team swarmed the building soon after, ushering all of us out from within room by room. The sense of relief was indescribable as they let us out, but not without a modicum of confusion. Several windows and doors were shattered, and parts of the hallways had been damaged as well, with parts of the hall even appearing melted. Some of the lockers were slumped and malformed like an intense heat had been focused on them. I don't know how that would be possible without causing a fire, but that's apparently what had happened. Once I finally stepped outside, I found my parents waiting for me along with my older sister. They hugged me tighter than ever before, as dozens of other families around us did the same. Behind us, I noticed the police sectioning off the school with barriers and tape as though it were an active crime scene. I questioned my parents on what had happened, but they didn't say much. We returned home and allowed the cops to conduct their investigation, and that's when everything got a lot stranger. Later that same day, I started feeling nauseous and proceeded to puke my guts out for the remainder of the evening. The headache I got then was by far the worst I've ever experienced. My parents at first thought it was an aftermath of the trauma, until some of the other parents said the same thing happened to their kids. Before I even knew what was happening, a bunch of dudes in biohazard equipment show up. They run a bunch of tests on me and tell me to remain calm. My parents and sister were separated from me, and I didn't see them for several days afterwards. The obvious concern was that myself and the other kids that felt sick had contracted some sort of virus, and with the previous events at the school, people were worried it was some sort of bioweapon terrorist attack. Thankfully, I woke up the following day feeling loads better. The medical personnel continued running tests, but everything looked relatively normal. Eventually, they made the discovery that our sickness was not due to a viral agent, bacteria, or mold, but instead due to radiation exposure. Thankfully, it wasn't enough to do serious long-term damage, but obviously explaining it was another matter entirely, one which we have yet to resolve. Our school was closed for almost a month after this event, which at the time was fantastic news for me. Once we were finally allowed to return to school, we were given zero explanation, just basically expected to forget anything ever happened. There were never any news reports, nor interviews or articles of any kind. It's like the whole thing never happened, and were it not for the memories of those who lived through it, there would not be any record at all. Kyle, the same kid from earlier, ended up not showing up for his English class directly following lunch period. For a while, people thought he had something to do with the lockdown and hell. Maybe he did, but I doubt we'll ever know now. He hasn't been seen since that day, almost 15 years ago now. He's not the only one. Our school's principal, the same guy I'd seen in the hall, along with one of the school's janitors, also vanished, never to be seen again. Police found no bodies, nor evidence of abduction or physical conflict, at least not that they're willing to admit publicly. There are no death certificates for any of them, and all three are simply listed as missing, and I doubt that's going to change anytime soon. I've questioned my parents about this, and they claim all the police told them was that a dangerous fugitive had broken into the school that day. A dangerous fugitive who apparently was capable of summoning eclipses, melting lockers, and tearing metal doors from their hinges, not to mention the whole radiation thing as well. That's another thing too. There is no record of a solar eclipse on that day, and I've looked everywhere I can think to. We weren't allowed anywhere near the school for weeks afterwards. Cops sectioned off the streets that led to it, while others patrolled the surrounding woods. On several occasions, we saw guys in blacked out Suburbans and cargo vans driving down there. They never formally identified themselves. I overheard my parents talking back then once, and I remember my dad telling my mom that he didn't think the school would ever reopen. He said it didn't feel the police were conducting a routine investigation, and told her the entire thing seemed more like a cover-up than a crime scene. I've asked them more recently as well. They seem to have learned very little. I've shared this experience with them too, and although they agree it was weird and disturbing, they don't seem to have any further theories. I've spoken to others who were there that day too, and gotten all manner of mixed responses. Lamar seems to think we were attacked by aliens, while Scotty seems to think our entire school fell into a separate dimension for a period of time. Maybe there is a logical and boring explanation to all of this, but I have yet to find it. Considering the secrecy, the lack of coverage, and the way the authorities behaved, I'd say it's safe to conclude that something out of the ordinary happened that day, but we may never know what. Whatever it was, I think Kyle saw it, and I think that's why he's gone. When the school finally reopened, it never quite felt the same. We ended up finishing out that year, but it wasn't without incident. Multiple students I know claim to have seen things they couldn't explain in that building. Everything from ghosts and demons to wild animals. A few students even suffered full-on mental breakdowns and panic attacks while in the old school. I even know of at least one girl who spent some time in a psyche ward afterwards. Perhaps most of it could be attributed to PTSD related to the lockdown, or maybe there was something far more sinister at play. Nightmares and bouts of sleep paralysis followed me for years after this event, and I still get them every once in a while. Even now, I never know how to describe them, but I wouldn't wish them on anyone. I've always hoped that one day I'd be able to look back on this event with hindsight and understand that it was only scary because I was a kid, like I imagined it wrong or didn't understand. I still can't say I understand what happened, but I can't help but feel more worried now than I was then. As a kid, life goes on and you forget, but as an adult, you end up just ruminating on it over and over until coming to a worrying realization. We as humans set up these systems, ways of life, comfort zones, but there are things out there that can, and sometimes will, bypass all of them. Things that are far beyond our understanding, that we have little power against, and sometimes we got shown firsthand what those things are truly capable of. My school is on lockdown. Please help. Series. It's 10:11 p.m. right now. I'm inside a classroom on the 3rd floor of my school because, as the title says, we're on lockdown. Right now, everyone is sleeping. Even the guy watching over us. The tears, adrenaline, and fear that fueled our day took its toll, and we were all knocked out cold. But before I continue, you have questions, and I may have answers. So let me start before he wakes up. I'm a senior in high school. I live in a fairly safe neighborhood, with the exception of the only danger being drug deals. The whole thing started at about 1:25 p.m., passing period between 6th and 7th period. It was a typical school day, no special events happening, or nothing out of the ordinary. My girlfriend and I were one of the last people to leave the classroom, since she had to ask the teacher a question, and being her boyfriend, I waited for her. We went to the 2nd floor to get my AP Environmental Science textbook before heading to the 3rd floor. We had about 3 minutes left in our 7-minute passing periods. We got to the 3rd floor of the school and in a small hallway with 2 stairways on opposite ends of the hall. As we walked down the hall, I noticed a kid next to me wearing very dark and loose clothing. Weird, I thought to myself. I looked straight and noticed another kid heading down the stairs, wearing almost the same thing. We parted ways to our classes. Mine was located in the very back of the school. The S-wing class began, and so did our daily routine. There's a kid named Matt who sits the back of the classroom and mainly keeps to himself. He never participates and always does projects alone. For whatever odd reason, he was dressed like he was ready for a baseball game with a jersey and baseball bag with bats. Pretty damn odd, if you ask me. The teacher asked us to pull out our homework, and we complied. That's when it all happened. Suddenly, we heard popping noises in rapid succession from down below and screaming. "What the hell is going on?" one of my classmates asked. He went to leave the classroom to investigate. Just then, Matt stood up and clocked the kid across the head with one of the bats. He flew onto the floor, and Matt pulled out a gun from his jacket. "Get the fuck on the floor," he screamed at us. We all screamed. We dove on the floor, and everyone was crying instantaneously. I looked at Matt from head to toe before I knelt down with my hands behind my head. Everyone was staring at our classmate, who was laying on the floor in a pool of blood. He groaned and tried to get up. Matt walked over to him, fist clenching the bat. He raised the bat in the air and delivered a blow to his face. Blood splattered everywhere, and he laid there motionless. There was more gunshots from below. The school rattled with gunshots and screaming. The first thing I had on my mind was my girlfriend. I needed to make sure she was safe. "Phones, give them to me, now." Matt pointed his gun at us. "What the fuck do you want from us?" someone shouted at him as people began to put their phones in a bag. Matt looked at the guy and walked over to him. A distraction, I thought to myself. I quickly pulled out my phone and tried to shoot a quick text to my girlfriend. "Are you okay?" I typed at near superhuman speed. Then I slid my phone face down under the desk. Matt hit the guy who questioned him. He walked over to me to get my cell phone. It's not with me. I forgot it in the gym locker. Matt looked at me for a good 10 seconds before moving on to the next kid. After collecting all the cell phones and threw them in his bag. All right, motherfuckers, I'm in charge now. You are to listen to whatever the fuck I say, and you will do exactly as I say, or you will end up like your friend over there. He motioned to our dead classmate. Do you fuckers understand? We all nodded. Let me try to provide some background on Matt, or at least whatever I know about him. I'm sure there is something wrong with Matt. We'd always hear him talking to himself while his head is down in his arms. He hangs out with the outcasts in our grade and is very distant from almost everyone. I don't want to say this, but I'm sure his family practically disowned him. One of my friends told me that they once saw his dad pick him up from school, and Matt had to practically jump in the car while the car was still going 30 miles per hour. No one recalls ever seeing him with his parents during special events. Reason why I said this is because Matt sat up on the teacher's desk and pulled out his phone. He started reading his messages out loud. Doors and stairs are secured. He was reading texts. I could tell because his thumb was doing the swiping motion. Cops are outside. They're trying to find a way in. Matt smiled and started typing. These fuckers are in for a surprise once they try to open the door. I was trying to formulate a plan. One of my dreams has become reality. By the way, I'm sorry if it seems like I'm making this school shooting seem like a good thing. It most definitely is not. But for some reason, I think about these situations out of boredom. I come up with contingency plans in case my school gets shot up, or my workplace, or the grocery store. I think about these things, and I have no clue why. It's just the person I am. Where's Officer Gary? Matt read out loud again. He's been taken care of. Matt smiled. I've brought them into the gym. Matt read out loud. Good, Kyle is in the gym, Matt said as he typed his text. Hey, new kid, Matt read. What the hell does this kid want? Matt asked out loud to himself before typing his message. Matt stopped talking out loud after he saw someone looking at him. Matt smashed his face with a bat. This all happened in the span of about 40 minutes. We're starving. We're shaken up, traumatized. We lost communication with the outside world. So many mutual thoughts are running through our heads, such as what's going to happen to us, our parents, loved ones. Are we going to make it out of this? Why is this happening? After sitting around and doing absolutely nothing for hours, everyone fell asleep in the room. Matt dozed off about 10 minutes before I started typing this. Right when I was sure he was asleep, I reached under the desk and pulled out my phone. I still had about 87% battery. I had a text from my girlfriend. We've talked about what to do in this situation. Are you okay? 1:37 p.m. Yeah, I'm in class. Some asshole is here too. 1:38 p.m. Shit, he's taking our phones. 1:38 p.m. We've talked about this. 1:38 p.m. Please try to get back to me when you can. 1:38 p.m. GTG. 1:38 p.m. I texted my family and told them what's going on. And now I'm here on our no sleep. It's 11:01 p.m. now. I'm sorry if I seem very disorganized, unlike other entries on our no sleep. There's just so many damn thoughts going through my mind. I'm going to take a quick moment and list what I know and what I don't know. What I know. There's a group of these guys holding up the school. The cops can't get in because the doors have either been A, barricaded, or B, blocked in some other way. All electronics have been confiscated. This is a planned attack. What I don't know, Matt is new, which means he could have no little experience in this type of situation. However, I don't know that. He could have experience, or he could have no idea what he's doing. These guys are armed, and so is Matt. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know why they decided to shoot up the school. A lot of you may be screaming at your screens that now is the time to go up to Matt and fucking bust his ass. As tempting as it is, now isn't the time. I need answers. I need to know why this is happening and what they want from us. This isn't Columbine or Virginia Tech. This isn't a murder-suicide or your typical school shooting. They aren't shooting this school up because of rage. They want something, and I need to find out what that is. I need rest. I have what it takes to get to the bottom of this, but I can't do this alone. So if anyone from my school happens to see this, please contact me. We need to take these guys down. It's time to put my skills to the test. I'll try to provide an update tomorrow if I can, if I succeed. If not, spread this news to everyone. We don't know how long this holdup will last, but this information could save lives. I gotta throw my phone back under the desk now. See ya. Edit. It's 12:16 p.m. I'm alive. I'll try to update soon. Edit. It's 3:37 p.m. I posted an update about an hour ago, but it was taken down by the mods. I'll repost it tonight, and based off what we're about to do, it's gonna be a long one. Edit. 4:21 p.m. Fuck. This is not going as planned. Fuck. Edit. 4:35 p.m. We barricaded ourselves in a classroom. Expect a huge update tonight. It's Friday, March 3rd, 2017, 6:07 p.m. A lot has happened since yesterday. My last post was removed once again, but because this chronicle doesn't fit in the horror genre, I deeply apologize to anyone who wanted to know what happened, but couldn't. Shit's about to go down pretty soon, and when this is all settled, I'll let you know what happened yesterday and what's about to happen right now. This ends tonight, March 4th, 2017, 10:17 a.m. We did it. We're alive and out of the school. Here's a scope of what happened. I used Matt's phone to lure one of his friends into a bathroom where we ambushed him and beat his head in with whatever we got. There were still 3 guys left and were to be found in the library gym, and the other one was wandering the school. At approximately 1 a.m. last night, I rallied up my buddies and we decided to turn the tables and bring the fight to them. We got the police on the phone and ran to a side entrance, and they helped us deactivate the devices. Thankfully, Brad is some sort of electronic genius, so we got this done, no problem. The police got in the building and they tried to force us to get out, but we did not comply and wanted to help evacuate the building. We ran to the classrooms and told them it is safe to get out and where to exit. Dakota ran back to our classroom and took the 3rd floor with Jake. Ryan and Brad took the 2nd floor, and Alex and I took the 1st. I passed the library and heard gunshots. I ran for cover and pulled out the gun I had, and more gunshots went off. Then I realized the gunshots were coming from inside the library. I peeked inside through the door, and one of those fuckers started executing the students inside. I can't run to get a cop, because by the time I get back with one, they could all be dead. If I scream for help, he'll hear I'm outside, and then kill all at once. I had to take matters into my own hands. I approached the door and got myself together. I had to shoot, and I had to kill. I opened the door and clicked the safety. The first thing I saw was the fucker standing on the table and about 7 bodies surrounding him. He spun around and I lifted my gun. 2 gunshots filled the room. His bullet grazed my arm and my bullet met its mark on the left side of his chest. He yelled and fell off the table. Everyone in the room screamed and I yelled at them to get the hell out of there. I ran to the guy and finished him off with a bullet to his head. I got out of the library and heard yelling and gunshots from the floor above me. My buddies and I regrouped and we went for the gym. We heard yelling down the hall. Police had swarmed the outside of the gym. Don't go in. He's threatening that he has a bomb. Have you tried going upstairs through the balconies? Alex asked. I said we can't go in because he's threatening that he has a bomb. I thought about what to do. The police couldn't enter through the upstairs part of the gym, through the wrestling and weight balconies. Then I had an idea. I pulled out Matt's cell phone and called the guy who was in there. His name was Kyle. Let us in and let them out. This fight is over. Those innocent people are not a part of this. We'll bring no weapons and no cops. I just want to talk. We'll figure something out. You'll walk out of this alive as long as we can all come to an understanding. He was quiet for a moment. Fine. About 50 people ran out of the gym and were escorted out by a few police officers. We put our guns down and the police gave us the okay. We walked in. There had to be at least 50 kids in there with this guy. He had his gun pointed down at them, and in his other hand was a button that was wired to the inside of his jacket. He lowered his hand with the button. What is it that you want? We tried to sound as peaceful as possible. We're listening. All we wanted was to be known. We slowly walked towards him as we listened. We see all these popular guys, athletes, hoes, anything. They're all known for doing something. he continued. Then one day I realized, with these school shootings, no one ever forgets those. Virginia Tech, Columbine, Sandy Hook. No one forgets those. No one ever will. So, I thought if we can orchestrate the greatest school shooting ever known to man, we'll definitely be remembered for years. So you did all of this just so people know you exist, Jake said with disgust. You gotta do what you gotta do. Well, this isn't just your typical school shooting. We've managed to keep you guys in here for 3 nights straight. I'm sure we've beaten the record. We paused for a moment. The police aren't planning on taking you alive, so I suggest you come with us, and we'll reason with them so you get out of here alive. We walked towards him. He raised his gun at us. Back off, we complied. You and your friends have killed maybe over 100 people. The police have orders to shoot on sight, and we want you leaving this building in handcuffs, not in a bag, I reasoned. No one deserves death, no matter what they did, to think they deserve it. I don't plan on getting out of here alive. He turned his gun to me and fired. I was pushed onto the floor. I turned and saw Alex laying on the ground with my friends on the floor, kneeling beside him. I looked up at Kyle. Then another gunshot rang. Kyle fell face first onto the floor. We looked to the wrestling balcony where the sound had came from. It was Matt. Please forgive us. He then turned the gun onto himself and another shot rang out. Jake got up and ran to the door and alerted the police. I got up and went to Alex. This guy just saved my life. They got Alex out of theirs and we got out of the school. I told the officers to get up to the wrestling balcony and get Matt's body. Somehow, Matt must have went around the police and entered the wrestling balcony through the other side. The police did one final sweep of the building to make sure everyone was out. Once we got out, Alex was put in an ambulance and immediately driven off to the hospital. As for me and my friends, we were also put in an ambulance and brought to the hospital. I had completely forgotten I was wounded in my arm. Right now, I'm in the hospital typing this on my phone. Thanks to your efforts, Redditors, we've managed to save as many lives as we can, even though it doesn't mean everyone. But we did what we could. The school is going to be shut down for quite a long time. I don't know if we'll have to go to a different school for now, but we'll see. I hid in a closet during a school lockdown and heard what really happened. The truth is much worse than what they told us. I'm very happy I'm not in school anymore. I graduated a few years ago, but more and more every day I hear about incidents at school. On the news, on the internet, on texts my friends send me, all sorts of horror stories. But the stories online are the ones I'm always finding myself glancing through. I've seen stories online of people relating how their school went into lockdown, and the story ends up being about some hobo who had been living under the school, or some crazy person from down the street who finally snapped one day. I don't know if they're true, but all I know is our school went into lockdown once, and I don't know if even the people at my school know the whole story as to what happened. I don't even know if I understand it myself. It still seems like a sort of fever dream. Something that didn't happen couldn't happen. It was the middle of third period. Math. I had just finished a big test. I found out later I had made a bunch of mistakes and ended up getting a D, but that's not really important to the story. I used the hall pass to go use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the school bathrooms were all located at the stairwells, and of course, the bathrooms on the first floor, where I was, were closed for repairs. I had to go up to the second floor, but before I got there, the bell rang. The bell never rang during class before, but as it did, an announcement came over the PA. Students and faculty, we are entering lockdown. This is not a drill. Please, all students and faculty follow all school procedures. I froze. I could hear sirens approaching. I came out of the stairwell, but already the doors were closing and I could hear them locking. I was alone and out in the open. I could go into the bathroom now, but the doors had no locks on them since my freshman year. After some juniors trapped a freshman in the bathroom and duct taped him inside a stall, they removed the ability to lock them at all. If there was somebody wandering the school, I'd have no chance if I went into there. I ran down the hall. I could see classrooms turning out their lights and covering the windows. I couldn't turn to them for help. All the instructions said to not answer the door. I had to find someplace safe nearby before something happened. I turned a corner and I saw my chance. The janitor's closet was open. Lunch was up next period, so he was probably out setting up tables when the announcement was made. He wasn't in there, and it could easily be locked from the inside. So I jumped in and shut off the light. The only light I saw was from the bottom of the door. I waited, and the sirens grew closer and eventually stopped. Time passed, and I wasn't sure if I was happy that I couldn't hear anything going on or tense, because I had no idea what was happening. Then I heard footsteps, lots of them. They stopped in the hallway. It must have been police. I could hear radios and other assorted noises. I didn't think it could be some sort of lone gunman or nutcase, so I listened. One guy in particular sounded like the one in charge. "Okay, are we in position?" Another guy answered. I didn't know what his rank was, but clearly he was not in charge of the first guy. "Yes, sir. We know the suspect is here in the building. C team is across the campus, as ordered, and B team is covering the back entrances. He will not exit the building on our watch," the chief responded. "Good. Remember, he could look like anyone, but he must not escape. It's my fault he's here, and it's my duty to deal with him." I couldn't hear much for a while. There was too much movement, too many people all talking to each other to make out anybody from where I sat. I just waited for a little while. Maybe it would all just be over soon, and I could leave the closet and go back to class. Then, that's when it all happened. The chief yelled out, "Hold it. Put your hands in the air." The commotion outside stopped abruptly. A moment later, clothes rustled loudly as what sounded like a large number of guns were drawn. "Lay down on the ground. Leave your hands where we can see them." It stayed quiet, except for a few of the guns cocking. I said, "Down the ground. Don't you dare try what I think you're going to do. You're not at the institute anymore." I thought I would hear shots go off, back and forth, and eventually somebody saying, "Suspect down." What I didn't expect was the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It wasn't somebody crying out in terror. It was like a wounded animal, mixed with the sound of a bandsaw hitting concrete. I've never heard anything like it before, and I hope I never hear it again. Then the guns began to fire. The horrible scream happened again, and then other screams, and then the sounds of tearing. I saw the shadows under the door as people moved and fell over, and heard the telltale splatter of gore as it soaked the floor. There was another gunshot, and I nearly yelled out myself when a bullet punched through part of the doorway. It wasn't very big, but I put my eye up against it, and I could see a group of people being attacked by somebody. But something wasn't right about him. He looked too long in places, like he'd been stretched in a taffy machine. He was moving so fast that I couldn't make anything out, except for him grabbing people, throwing them around like they were nothing. There was blood everywhere. More gunshots. The scream happened again and again. I pulled away from the bullet hole and sat back in the closet. Then the scream began to fade. I heard a thud, and then more footsteps. The chief spoke again, but he was breathing heavily, like he had been badly wounded. "Team A, he's down. I repeat, he's down. We need a cleanup immediately." I didn't move. I wanted to look again, but as curious as I was, I didn't really want to see. But I heard a lot of commotion for a long time, and then nothing. I don't know how long it was after that, but then the PA announced the lockdown had ended. I came out of the closet. I tried not to look, but for all the sounds I had heard, there was not as much sign of a fight as I thought there would be. Even the blood I had seen in that brief time through the bullet hole had all been removed. I went back to my class and just told everyone I had hid in a stall in the bathroom. People were impressed with my guts for doing it, but if nobody else had heard that scream, I certainly didn't want to bring it up. As you might expect, we all went home early that day. Police and EMT were everywhere, but as far as I could see, nobody was being taken away by either. My parents came and were so happy that I was all right. They had been following everything on the news and came as soon as they could. At home that night, I ate dinner and waited to see what happened on the news. The live coverage had ended a long time ago, but when the news came back on at 10 o'clock, I wanted to see everything. As it started, I saw classes had been canceled for the rest of the week, but then things started to get weird. The news talked about a student who they refused to name, how he had come to school armed, but had been taken into custody after a short firefight. Stranger still, in the footage of the hallway where the scuffle had taken place, The door of the closest, which had been my refuge, was totally unscathed, not so much as a scratch on it, let alone bullet holes. It appeared to have been replaced outright, well before any investigation could have been completed. I saw pictures of the student being led away in cuffs. He didn't have a mark on him. He wasn't even wounded as he was pushed to a police car and driven away. All I saw was him fighting and yelling. Even in my glimpses through that bullet hole, I knew that wasn't the same one I saw. The clothes were completely different. The one I had seen had been wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. The one getting into the police car was wearing a white shirt and shorts. The news said no one had been hurt despite the gunfire, but I knew people had been wounded, even killed. I'd heard them screaming in agony as something vicious had attacked them. And then there was what that chief guy had said, talking about something being his fault, the institution, that he could look like anyone. I don't know what happened that day for certain. I didn't see enough. I didn't hear enough to get the full story, but this is what I can tell you. I know there was no shooter at our school. I know that someone was arrested that day, someone who I didn't know, who I never heard about ever again. That's right, a shooter who never made another day's worth of news, just disappeared. When was the last time that ever happened? I know that chief guy and his squads were not cops. I don't know who they were, but I know cops don't clean up a crime scene like that. And no human being has ever screamed like that, ever. But whatever it was that I heard attacking those people, all I know is it came into that hallway where I was. I was alone, and if it hadn't been for that janitor's closet, I wouldn't have been safe. It could have looked like anyone. Something tells me that squad wouldn't have helped me either. What was it? How long had it been in our school? Had I ever been alone with it and never knew what it was? Who were those people who had come for it? Where had it come from? And good God, is it really dead? A school lockdown is happening. The intruder isn't human. It was a normal and boring day of school. As always, I was in the biology class picking some stuff for the teacher when the principal spoke. All teachers must lock their classroom doors, stay quiet, and turn off your lights. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Now, when I heard him, I really thought it was a school lockdown drill, since we did a lot of those in the previous years, but something in his voice told me it really wasn't a drill. So, as I was away from my classroom, I left the teacher's things there and left the classroom quietly. I started heading to my class, and when I got there, I quietly knocked on the door. "Hey, Mrs. Rose, it's me, Toby. Can I please come in? I don't want to meet the intruder." "I'm sorry, Toby, but I can't let you in." The principal called and he said to not let anyone in or out. Mrs. Rose was a lady in her mid-40s, married with one kid. She was the sweet type that would give out candy to her students at the end of the year, but she also held her positions very well, and I knew she would not give in. I left, thinking about where to go, and the school's generator popped in my head. Since my school was kinda big, it was fairly far away. I started heading that way when I heard someone behind me. It was a police unit. I didn't even know they were called. Lucky me, I guess, huh? "Nope. Hey kid, you know there is someone bad out here, right?" "Yes, officer." But I was at the bathroom when it happened. I wasn't going to give him a full-on explanation of how I got in this situation. "Well, did you..." He didn't even finish his phrase when some humanoid creature appeared behind him and slashed his head off. I was paralyzed. It must have been at least 7 feet tall. It was naked. No hair anywhere on its body, and it had big, round, black eyes. When its eyes locked on me, it let out a loud scream, and it charged at me. I barely dodged it. This thing is extremely fast, I thought. I started running the other way, which was luckily the way to the generator room. That thing, I don't even know what to call it, started running after me. It almost got me when I suddenly turned a corner, which caught it off guard and had to turn around and come after me again. I was already halfway down the hall. I will not make it to the generator room in time, I thought to myself. I turned another corner, the thing about 10 meters back, catching up quick. I entered a bathroom and quickly ran in the farthest stall. I heard a voice. Who is that? I recognized that voice as my classmate, Duncan. I always hated this guy. Bully type, dumb as hell, All the stereotypes of a high school bad boy. It's Toby. Now shut up. There is some creature out there, I said quietly. What creature are you talking about? Right as he spoke, I heard the bathroom door open and the thing started searching for me. It heard Duncan's voice, and it probably thought it was me, hiding from it. It started opening the stalls one by one, and luckily I was in the last one, just after Duncan. When it got to Duncan, I heard him yell, "What the fuck?" and then let out a horrified scream. It killed Duncan. Even though I hated Duncan, I still felt bad for him, dying to this creature. After it killed Duncan, it left in search for more kills. After I stopped hearing its steps, I left the stall too and looked out the bathroom to see which way it went. I saw it turn a corner towards the principal's office, which was the way I need to go to get to the generator room. It's better going in an empty classroom, I thought to myself. I didn't see it check any classrooms anyway. I searched for an empty classroom, and it was the chemistry laboratory. I locked the door after me. The light were already off. I headed to the closet. Everyone hides in closets, right? Yes, everyone does, because when I opened the door to the closet, some girl almost hit me with a mop, but she stopped just in time. She was a classmate from elementary school. What is going on out there? Who is making the screams I heard? She asked, very confused. There is some kind of creature out there. It killed Duncan and a police officer, I said to her. She had a puzzled look on her face. What creature? And Duncan is dead? She said, panic evident in her voice. I don't know what it is, but it almost killed me too. So let's hide until we can safely leave, I said. I looked through the keyhole and saw that thing pass. I stumbled back and it stopped dead in its tracks. It headed my way as it heard me fall. I took Emma's hand and quickly entered the closet with her. Just as that thing broke the door down, Emma let out a fearful breath, but I covered her mouth and signed her to shut up. The thing stopped and looked around, and when it wandered its eyes towards the closet, I thought we were dead, but it kept walking. It looked around for a good 5 minutes, then it left. What the fuck is that? Emma asked. I don't really know. I was in the biology lab when I heard the principal. I started going towards my classroom, and since that stubborn Mrs. Rose did not let me in, I wanted to go to the generator room. On my way there, I saw a police officer, and he spoke to me. I told him I was in the bathroom, then that creature killed him. I ran from it, and somehow I got a lead and hid in a bathroom. Duncan was there, and this thing came in and killed him. After that, I came here and found you. This all that happened to me until now. Wow. I can't believe Duncan is dead. Didn't really like him, but I still felt bad, I guess, she said, still taking in all I had to say. Yeah, me neither. He was such an asshole to everybody. Okay, so do we wait it out and see what happens? Emma said, not much hope in her voice. Well, I guess that's what we do. My school is on lockdown. The reason behind it is very disturbing. I, 17-year-old female, go to a high school near a forest which the school forbids us to visit. My other friends and I have always wanted to see what secrets are behind those big tall trees. We have planned to sneak into the forest just before school on Thursday. It is currently Wednesday, so tomorrow will be a game changer. School was just about to end when our classroom doors locked. They were sealed shut. I stood up to see everyone in shock, and the teacher was trying to calm down the crying girl. A few minutes later, while trying to calm everyone down, we heard screaming, screams of agony. I rushed to look out the window, but before I could see anything, my teacher stepped in front of me and told me it's better if I don't see anything. I sat down, curious to what had caused that girl so much pain that she had to scream. The classroom became deadly silent, still lost in my thoughts about the screaming girl. My eyes became heavy, and I closed them for a while. I was awoken by another scream, followed by more, and then a loud bang. I then pushed my way through the crowd of students to the window, and what I saw next horrified not just me, but everyone who stood and looked out the window. We were all petrified of what could happen to us if we could be their next victim. I saw this thing. I have no idea what it's called. It has long black hair. It's covered in blood. There's blood dripping from its mouth, and it's wearing a white dress that comes to its knees and had holes in it. You can see that it has been severely injured. As it sees its next victim running down the hallway, it screeches and runs on all fours, head faced backwards. It runs after the girl from class 8. I knew that girl she was in my gym class. I sadly had to watch her slowly get devoured by the creature. I tugged on my friend's shirt and told her to see what is happening. All she said in return was, "It can sense us. We next." I felt shivers throughout my body. I felt my legs get numb. I heard a loud knock 3 times before it was dead silence. Everyone was petrified for what could happen. The girl who was crying suddenly stopped and turned to face the door. "I do not have a good feeling about this," she said to her boyfriend, whose fear was visible on his face. The one window that was open suddenly closed. It was strange because no one was anywhere near that window. I could feel that something was off. I just had no idea what. I reached down for a chair, ready to throw it at anything that came into the classroom. After seconds of having all that fear and anxiousness build up inside us, it had finally entered. As it walked, the air was heavy and the room started to smell like rotting corpse. It turned to look at the girl and her boyfriend, its face pale white. I didn't dare to look it in its eyes, but they did. It screeched it ran at them. The way it ran made me want to puke. It looked very disturbing. I watched in horror as the creature was slowly devouring them. I took my friend's hand and ran out of the classroom, and we both looked at each other when we reached the hallway, our eyes wide open to what we were witnessing. Dead bodies laying all over the hallways. How could one creature eat so much? Unless there was more. My friend, still standing there in shock, let out a scream, which she should not have done. The creature bolted across the room, leaving the couple behind, and took my friend in its hand and munched on her. I slowly but softly went back into the classroom, trying my best not to let out loud sobs as I watched the monster eat her piece by piece. She screamed loudly and cried out for help, but there was absolutely nothing I could do. With tears streaming down my face, I gradually closed the door. I walked to the corner of the room and sobbed softly. The teacher called us all and told us something that was upsetting and very shocking. This information I am about to disclose has to be the most crucial part of what is happening. He told that this happens every 20 years. This creature lives in the forest, and that is why we were forbid not to enter the forest. He also said it feeds on students of this school as revenge for building the school on its homeland. The creature was a human that has been bitten by some other entity. We cannot fully explain the origin of this creature. There are some secrets that you would be better off without. We have still yet to find out what and where this entity is. I asked on how to escape from here, but all the teacher had in response was, "There's no escape. Just be quiet and don't look it in the eye, and it won't attack you unless it's extremely hungry." I am currently writing this while sitting in the classroom, still hearing it munching on other students, not caring about their screams. I have no idea how to cope with all these noises. I'm starting to lose hope. I'm wondering if we will ever get out. Everyone in the class is dead, except me and one other kid who looks like he's about to burst out crying. I can't get out of here yet. I have to wait. I've been waiting for 3 days and 17 hours. I have no hope left. I still have no explanation to anything, but being here for 3 days is taking a toll on my health. I just want to leave.